This is the OPPO Find N5 foldable, and it's the first OPPO phone I've ever featured on the channel. OPPO actually reached out to us and they wanted to sponsor this video, but I had a big question for them. Can we tear the phone down? To my surprise, that was a requirement. They want us to tear this phone down. They want us to take a look at the insides. They want us to show you guys everything. I'm already impressed at how thin this is, so I'm also curious, what's inside this phone? How did they make it so thin? It's literally the size of a USB-C port. That's crazy. Let's have a look. This is the Cosmic Black edition. You can see the back glass has kind of a matte texture. It's pretty nice. We also have what they're calling the Cosmos ring, which holds the camera array. I'll go into specifics of everything as soon as I tear it down, which is very soon, but before I do, this phone is actually the thinnest book-style foldable phone on the market right now. Unfolded, this is only 4.21 millimeters thick, and folded, it's only 8.93 millimeters thick, which is insane. This weighs 229 grams, and when you're using it like this, it feels like a normal phone. You kind of forget it's a foldable, and then you open it up, and you have this massive screen. Speaking of opening it up, it's time to tear this guy down. We'll start off by cooking the front cover display. So this is actually a 120 hertz display, which is probably done cooking by now. It also has a peak brightness of 2450 nits, and they used an ultra thin nanocrystal glass, which is thinner than traditional glass without sacrifices to durability. I'm also probably the first person to tear this phone down on camera, which is pretty cool. Because this phone has such a high water resistance rating, IPX6, IPX8, and IPX9, getting into this phone might be a little bit difficult. We're just applying some alcohol around the perimeter of the display. To remove the screen, we'll use a metal prying tool and wedge it between the screen and the frame and gently pry it and kind of scrape across the display. Because this is so water resistant, well, it's sealed shut, and removing the display was not easy. Now we can go ahead and open it up. Take a look at how thin that display is. I genuinely think it's the thinnest I've ever seen. We'll put that aside, and that is the inside of the OPPO Find N5 foldable phone. So we have 3 Phillips screws here. Looks like it's all Phillips screws, which is nice. And we have 2 Phillips screws here to remove this cover. We're probably going to remove this one first because that's where the battery is, and we want to disconnect that. Now we'll remove the plate, and we can disconnect the battery. I believe this is the battery. We can also unscrew the Phillips screws over here. Unscrew number 2. Remove this, and now we could go ahead and disconnect that front cover display. This is a pretty good looking phone on the inside, but I want to show you guys the battery. So to do that, we're gonna have to disconnect every flex cable we can see. This isn't your typical lithium ion battery. OPPO specifically made it to be as thin as possible. It's actually a silicone carbon battery, similar to batteries used in electric vehicles, instead of the usual lithium ion batteries we're so used to seeing. These can charge faster without getting as hot and have a higher energy density. You can charge this phone to 100% in less than 50 minutes due to its 80-watt charging speeds because of how good these batteries are. Now, to remove the battery, we'll pour some isopropyl alcohol underneath, let that soak for a little while, wedge the plastic prying card underneath the battery, detaching it from the housing. Removing this actually wasn't that hard. It's mildly adhered. There's no pull tabs or anything, but just sliding a card under with some isopropyl alcohol, it wasn't difficult at all. Because this battery is so thin though, you have to be careful with it because it can bend. But on the battery, it says that it's a 2515 milliamp hour battery. I'm kind of speechless at how thin this is. I've never seen anything like this before. Before we move on, we have our SIM card reader right over here. We have a loudspeaker over here. This little gold thing is a microphone. We have the subboard, the 8 megapixel camera right up there. And we also have another speaker here, which is actually the earpiece speaker. And then our slider connects right over here. Let's tear this side down. This is made of aircraft grade glass fiber, and it has kind of a textured feel to it, which may or may not help me remove it with my suction cup. Let's find out. So the suction cup is not sucking well on the back glass. I keep saying back glass, but this isn't really like glass at all. Prying into it, it can bend, meaning we can't crack it on the way in, which is always nice. Having this material on the phone offers a 5 times stronger drop performance than the previous generation. It's strong like metal, but also much lighter. Open it up.
And take a look at that. That is the brains of the OPPO Find N5. They genuinely did not waste any space in this phone. It's so compact. So this is the wireless charging coil, and it can actually charge the phone with speeds up to 50 watts using an AirVook charger. I didn't know that was a thing, honestly, but I think now is a good time to mention that on this board is the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, which makes this the first foldable to have such a powerful chip. The sacrifices you make when you buy other foldables versus their flagships aren't really here in this device. You get pretty much everything, including this massive inner display. To get to the battery though, it looks like we have to remove the camera module, and over here we have the 50 megapixel telephoto camera. Down here we have the 50 megapixel main camera with OIS, and up here we have the ultra wide camera. We'll go ahead and unscrew every screw we can see until this guy comes off. Remove. Now it looks like we have a few flex cables we have to disconnect. This motherboard is so unbelievably compact, it's insane. Now we can remove our wireless charger, and just like we did before, we're going to pour some ISO under the battery, let that sit for a little bit, and then pry under gently using a plastic prying card. Removing it, despite not having pull tabs, honestly, not that hard. And boom. Removed. This battery is also extremely thin, and together with both these batteries, you're getting 5600 milliamp hours, which equates to 25 hours of continuous video streaming, making this the longest battery life in any foldable. You might have noticed by now that the materials behind the battery are actually different. You could tell there is a color difference, and that's because this part over here is made of aluminum ceramic, which is only 0.18 millimeters thick, while this one over here is made of carbon fiber and is 0.07 millimeters thick. Crazy. It's time to check out that motherboard, so we're going to unscrew any screws holding down the motherboard, disconnect the front camera. We should just be able to pull up on it and remove it. Whoa. Yeah, that's insane. So you might have noticed this is incredibly thin. Seems to be a theme with this video. And this is actually the most compact motherboard that OPPO has ever made. It's only 1.39 millimeters thick, and it's a 2-layer board with a 4-sided layout. You can see parts of the board are elevated and higher. Because it's a sandwich board. They wasted absolutely no space, and they did that because they wanted to make sure there were no compromises on battery. Now let's take a look at that Snapdragon chip. To do that, we need to fold back all the copper on the motherboard, and well, you can't quite see it. That's actually because it's stacked below the RAM. It's right under the RAM, and you can kind of see a bit of the green, which is the Snapdragon chip. Now it's time to take apart the inner display and check out that hinge. This is an 8.12 inch display, 120 Hertz, and it has a peak brightness of 2100 nits. Cook the OPPO Find N5. Now that we've heated up the display, we can pry a plastic prying card between the frame and the actual display. This little plastic frame here around the display is meant to seal everything off so nothing can enter and go under the display. We'll pry around the entire thing and remove both sides. Now that that's off, we can take our plastic prying card and also pry under the display. To my surprise, removing the inner display was actually much easier than I'm used to, and that's due to a few things I'll mention later. Before we can fully remove the display, we need to disconnect it from the subboard that we still have installed in the phone. To disconnect it though, we actually have to remove that board, and then we can remove the entire display. And now you can get a good look at the 0.1 millimeter stainless steel layer OPPO has added behind the screen to provide some structure. It also made prying it off just a little bit easier. So on the screen, there's an anti-shock film made from custom elastomer material. The film basically helps absorb stress from bending and stretching, so the screen stays durable over time instead of warping or cracking. Now, let's check out the hinge. So this is OPPO's titanium flexion hinge. It's made from grade 5 titanium alloy, the same material used in the Boeing 787s and even Mars rovers. It's 36% stronger and 26% smaller than before, allowing OPPO to keep the phone ultra thin without sacrificing durability. OPPO also used 3D printing technology to precisely shape the hinge components, making them lighter and more compact. The thing that shocked me the most is finding out that this phone was IPX9 water resistant. And water resistance in foldables is tricky, especially around the hinge, obviously because it's a moving part. They use back glue to secure everything in place. That's this kind of adhesive. And then they use dot glue in strategic locations to reinforce the seal and prevent gaps. That's the more stringy kind of glue. And then they use fluid glue right over here to really make sure that there's a strong water resistant barrier and that nothing's entering the actual phone. Really impressive that they were able to give this such a high water resistance rating. What was even more impressive was the process of putting this back together. It was a little bit easier than I thought it would be. Once we got the board and everything else in, it was time to test out the inner display, and to my surprise, it actually worked. These displays break extremely easily, but that 0.1 millimeter thick stainless steel sheet at the back really provided support for when I was trying to remove it. And there we go. The OPPO Find N5 is all back together. Hope you enjoyed this teardown. I really did. This phone is absolutely insane. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.